You have contributed to Kimbo MSP Prince. How can project managers leverage these effectively? And what are some common pitfalls that they should avoid when applying them?
The first and most important one is the PMBOK guide, for example, is a really good resource, but it is not a methodology. People talk about implementing the PMBOK guide or running projects based on the PMBOK guide, and that just doesn't work. Other thing is people don't understand the dynamics behind the project and only see the rituals, the documents, the labels. And then they try to create those things in their project without the dynamics behind them, and they don't succeed. It's practically the cargo cult effect. The third one I can mention is that many people make their systems too complicated. Our projects are complicated. Life is complicated. But it doesn't mean that the system we have for managing a part of that has to be complicated. One other thing is people don't want to change anything. Any implementation of a project management system is about changing the way you work. I think that's obvious. The last thing is people think that in order to have a good project management system, they have to go through a huge organizational change initiative. These are the things that come to my mind when it comes to pitfalls.
Welcome to Life and IT Project Management, where we bridge the gap between life and IT project management with practical, relatable content for aspiring PMs and experienced PMs alike. Today, we are joined by someone very special. We are joined by someone who is, of course, first of all, a project management expert with nearly 3 decades of experience spanning construction, IT, and of course, startup projects. From his early role as a project planner, Nader transitioned into helping organizations enhance their project program and portfolio management systems. Today, he focuses on giving back to the community and focuses on e-learning development at Management Plaza, authoring over 50 books and contributing to global project management standards across board. As a core developer for frameworks like P3.Express, P5.Express, and NUP, which is near universal principles of projects, and a consultant on major standards, including PMBOK, Prince2, and MSP. Nader continues to shape the future of project management practices. Please join me in welcoming Nader.
Thank you. That's very nice of you.
You're welcome. All right. Our topic today is understanding the project management landscape, your roadmap for consistent success of a project, program, or portfolio leader. And I'll go straight into the questions. So Nader, with your experience across construction, IT, and other projects, what have come up as key differences in managing projects in diverse fields, and how can project leaders adapt based on the industries?
Well, one difference I see in different projects, and I believe has a great impact on everything, especially on how we run the project, is the number of people and the way those people work together. Because sometimes we have many people, but they are working on separate things. So that doesn't become things too complicated. But sometimes we have only 50 people, but they are all working on the same thing. So it becomes really complicated. Traditionally, some people see it as channels of communication, but maybe you can see it as channels of impact, the number of ways people can impact things. But that's the first thing for me, how we can work with those people. If you have, for example, 200 people working in a process plant project, that's okay, that's simple. But 200 people on IT development project, that makes it very complicated to work.
Mm-hmm.
But then in a process plant project or construction project, sometimes you have 1,000 people, 2,000 people working. And again, that becomes very complicated. That's for me the first and most important thing. But then also we have the type of people, especially people outside the project, the customer side. Sometimes you have customers who understand the technical aspects. That makes it easier. But sometimes also a little bit difficult. But some customers don't understand anything about the product you're building for them, the technical aspects of the product. It also has its own impact. Sometimes we have regulations. Sometimes the project is very sensitive. It can impact lives if you don't do it properly. These things all change the way we manage the project. I think that these all can be seen as one thing. Maybe I can come up with a good name for that one thing, but right now I'm not ready for that. Maybe in the future. The other thing is about the product we are building. Sometimes there's a relationship between what we really create, the output of the project, and the results we have from that thing. This relationship is sometimes really simple and objective. You can sit down, think about it, and do everything up front. When you want to, for example, send a rover to Mars, that's what you think. It's complicated, but you can do it up front. But some other projects, we have a really non-linear, difficult to discover relationship between these two. And that's mainly because it's based on the perception of human beings, which is something really complicated. When you think of many of the pieces of software, how good they are and how successful they can be, that depends on the perception of the users. And it's hard to predict the perception of those users. So for me, that's the second thing. How predictable it can be, the relationship between the output and the outcome, how adaptive we have to. These are things that I can think of about the differences in projects, but it's also important that we are not talking about things that exist in some projects and don't exist in some other projects, about different degrees of importance for those concerns. But in general, we usually share the same problems everywhere. Some problems are really simple in some projects, but really huge in some other projects. So most of them are in common, and that's why we can have project management systems.
Fantastic. You will be the first person I will ask this type of question, and you will speak to, first of all, the people, the size of the project, and the relationship between, of course, the outcome and the results, basically, how we engage and so forth. Why? Because most PMs and others begin with the difference in the industry. Like you first of all have to go look at, okay, do you have T-shaped skill sets in a specific industry before you even speak of engaging with the people and so forth, right? But your perspective is beautiful. That leads me to the next question. Now,
I'm sorry, before you go on, I just remembered something to add to what I said before. When it comes to people, I've learned a lot from really great project managers. I was really fortunate to have access to those people. And there was one of these people who was absolutely amazing. And his specialty was that whenever they had a huge problem in the project, in a certain project, and they thought that it's going to just be destroyed and cause a huge problem for the company, they would call him to come and fix it. He almost never started the project from scratch. And he could do that. He was really great. And I worked with him in a few projects. But and usually the types of projects he had were construction projects with 500 or 600 people. Once they gave him a project with about 5,000 people, still construction project, but a lot bigger. And it was just frightening. I saw that he could not do it well. I couldn't believe it. The scale of the project changed, and someone who was an amazing project manager, one of the best project managers I've seen, couldn't do it well. they had to change him. I was one of the people who suggested change him.
Wow. Wow. That is, and one thing, of course, would have been being upfront regarding, okay, fine, we do now need intermediate, like break it out into, you don't want to really break it out into silos and so forth and have specific leads across board to better manage it. But anyway, that's a different question. But thank you for including that. Now that leads into the next question. You have contributed to many standards, Kimbo, MSP, FinStip. How can project managers leverage these effectively? And what are some common pitfalls that they should avoid when applying them?
I see a few problems, common problems. The first and most important one that comes to my mind is having incorrect expectations. That is the biggest problem. The PMBOK guide, for example, is a really good resource. It's very good, but it is not a methodology. And it was explained there in the introduction since, I think, version 2 or something. I have to look it up.
It's a guide.
It is a guide. It's an encyclopedia of different ideas that can help you. You also need to have a methodology. But even though it is explained in the introduction, and many of the trainers at least keep explaining that to people, people still try to use it as a methodology. They talk about implementing the PMBOK guide or running the projects based on the PMBOK guide. And that just doesn't work. That doesn't work. It's not because the PMBOK guide is not a good resource. It's because they are using it as something else other than what it is designed to be. That's the biggest problem, I think. And the other thing is that sometimes people don't go deep enough when it comes to resources. They become a little bit superficial. They only see what's on the surface. And a really common thing is to not understand the dynamics behind the things that happen in the project and only see the outputs, only see what's on the surface, the rituals, the documents, the labels. And then they try to create those things in their project without the dynamics behind them, and they don't succeed. It's practically the cargo cult effect, the famous concept. And for example, in Noop that you mentioned before, we have a principle about it. Don't do anything without a clear purpose. The first thing is to understand why you are doing something, and then you have to do it. That's, I think, really key. So that's 2. The third one I can mention is that many people make their systems too complicated. Our projects are complicated. Life is complicated. But it doesn't mean that the system we have for managing a part of that has to be complicated. It can focus on the most essential aspects and therefore remain simple. And there are lots of advantages in having something simple. Those complicated things usually become so difficult for people to use that they just give up in the middle. And there are 2 things that help in this area. The first thing is, instead of trying to customize everything upfront when it comes to the project management system, it's best to make that customization, that tailoring, really simple, and then have continuous tailoring throughout the project based on the feedback you get from the system. So basically, you have to be adaptive in your project management system. One last thing, two other things. One other thing is, some people, sometimes when it's about implementing a project management system, I've heard it for P3 Express, for example, it's very easy to implement it. But sometimes people say, well, that's not exactly how we do it in our organization. Okay, and what's your point? And you talk with them and you realize that they don't want to change anything. And I think it's really obvious. If you don't change anything, nothing changes.
Of course. Of course.
But sometimes there are so many things that they don't want to change that practically doesn't make sense to think about implementing a project management system. Any implementation of a project management system is about changing the way you work. I think that's obvious, but some people sometimes forget about it.
Right.
The last thing is that I think is very common is that many people think that in order to have a good project management system, they have to go through a really fundamental, huge organizational change initiative and do it for the whole organization, do lots of crazy things. It's a little bit the opposite of the previous one, but they also even have overlaps, even though they look like opposites. And they make it so big that it practically doesn't happen. One of my favorites is secret implementations. I've seen many project managers who implement P3 Express, for example, even without telling anyone. No one realizes that it happens, but they do it. You don't need to ask for permission as a project manager. You don't need to have the support of 100 different people. If you really want, and you have access to a few people who help you in the project, together you can implement a simple project management system. Then throughout years, you can add more to it with the help of the whole organization. These are the things that come to my mind when it comes to pitfalls for implementing.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate, and this is validating all those project managers out there who have looked at the project management system and they have thoughts at the back of their minds. This, first of all, this does not fit this problem. That's one. Number two, these are the most efficient, useful parts of the approach that I want to go about. And I can actually adapt. One beautiful thing you said, an adaptive approach as you move forward, because you might start with one, and with that you can correct me. You might start with one approach. For example, I don't want to mention specific things. You start with one approach, but as you move forward, as things probably expand and stakeholders expand and increase and requirements increase, then you can adapt accordingly, right? That's the way I understood what you said, which project managers should hear, and even aspiring project managers should know. And that is including the fact that you might be lucky that you get into an organization and you already have an established, worldwide supported way of working, right? Which you would have to plug into, but always be adaptive. Thank you so much for that feedback. Third question. As a core developer of P3.express and P5.express, what inspired the creation? This might be chunky, but what inspired the creation of these minimalist frameworks, and how do they address the complexities of modern project management? Because I know P5 is portfolio down, P3 is project up, right? So how do they stay minimalistic and still address those two types of scale-up projects?
Well, you ask how they address the complexities of projects or portfolios, and the answer is minimalism. And I realized in the past few months that some people don't know exactly what minimalism is, and especially because in some languages there's a word similar to minimalism with different type of connotation. So what basically minimalism means in most types of contexts is that instead of trying to cover everything, you intentionally focus on the essentials, on the most important things. So the result is that you will have only a few items instead of many items. And the system, whatever it is, it can be a work of art, it can be a work of literature, it can be a philosophical idea, it can be a project management system. So that result would be more straightforward and simple. Easier to learn, easier to use, and easier to teach. Being easier to teach is also important because it's not only about trainers. As project managers, we are always explaining things. We have to tell people in the project how the project is working. That's a type of teaching. You also have to do it for the managers in the organization and for the outside customers. This is all, they have the same nature as teaching. That's why it is important for the project management system to be easy to teach. One of the design criteria in all OMIMO modules, especially P3 Express, is that it should be easy to understand for all types of stakeholders, which is, I think it has succeeded based on the feedback we receive. When you think about, for example, Scrum, the technical people in the project usually have a good relationship with it. They can understand it and go on with it. But many of the managers do not understand what you're talking about. It's not aligned with the way they work. And that's the same with many customers. But on the other hand, when you think about something like Prince2, many of the customers understand it well and they like it. Managers more or less understand it, but team members, they go like, well, what are you talking about? What's happening here? So one of the ideas was to create something that all these three types of people, the team members, the managers in the organization, and the external customer, can feel comfortable with. The creation and story for all of these, starting with P3 Express, was that project managers keep trying to implement project management systems, and they always used to fail. I mean 95% of the time. And we keep blaming project managers for not doing it well, or we blame the higher managers for not supporting them. But in reality, when it happens again and again and again and again, we have to stop and ask, are we giving them the right type of thing they expect? In P3 Express, we stopped and said, no, we are not giving them the right thing. When most people are failing, the problem is with us, not with them. So let's create something that people can really use. That's why it was created. And then during the process, we decided that in order for it to be really usable for people, it has to be minimalist, it has to be straightforward, it has to be compatible with different types of perspective, not only one of the stakeholders, and many more. So this was the creation story of it. And I also mentioned minimalism, which is one of the three main attributes in the OMIMO family. It has two other attributes as well. The other one is that all of them are non-proprietary. They are not libre, meaning that all the rights are given to the users. There are no copyright restrictions. It is there to respect human freedom. And the idea is that project management is something that can help improve quality of life. And if we have better project management, we will have a better world. And there are especially many places in the world that cannot afford a lot of things that happen in the project management domain. They are really limited and they may need it most. So one of the ideas is to just contribute to this betterment in any possible way. And we decided that respecting human freedom has to be there. It may go a little bit above that mission, but it's a really good thing. We just wanted to have it. And we really try to do that. So, for example, some people find it weird. About a year ago, we spent a lot of effort on the website and we reduced it, how heavy it was, to half of what it was before. What was the impact? It's a really lightweight website. It's really optimized. For people in Europe, for example, they saw that instead of 250 milliseconds, it's opening in 100 milliseconds. And you just say, well, I can't even tell the difference. I just have to look at the measurements in my browser to tell. Yes, that's true. But you're not everyone in the world. There are many places in the world where people don't have constant access to the internet, and it's extremely expensive for them. And also the devices they have are really, really weak. And in order to process a 1 megabyte or 2 megabyte JavaScript, they have to spend 1 minute or 2 minutes sometimes. So using that material becomes very difficult for them. Those are the people we are targeting when we reduce that timing from 250 milliseconds to
200.
100 milliseconds. That's about respecting humans. That's about thinking about those people, about having a better world. So that's the second attribute we're looking for. And the third one is we want all of them to be modular, meaning that we don't want to have vendor lock-in. If someone is using one of the modules, they don't have to use all the other modules. They are created to work with everything as much as possible. So for example, when you're using P5 Express, it's not limited to portfolios of projects that are using P3 Express and Micro P3 Express. They can be using Prince2, DSDM, Scrum, or anything else. It's been designed carefully to be like that. So that's the whole family of OMIMO. Open, it stands for Open Minimalist Modules, open for non-proprietary.
Fantastic, fantastic. I look forward to P5.express being released. I look forward
It
to
is released.
It is
P5
released now.
Yes. It was released about 2 months ago, I think.
Wow. I look forward to getting into it. I know that I got a couple of resources to look into. And I also like the fact that there is no restriction. As you know, there are systems that there is a restriction. For example, I don't want to mention any specific ones. The ways of working at the project level has to roll up to program level, has to roll up to portfolio level, and there are reasons for that, right? But having a system that, at any level, you're not vendor locked, right? You're not restricted. That's very beautiful. That's very beautiful. So going into the next question. Now, for aspiring project, program, and portfolio leaders, how is it important to continuously evolve their project? You've touched on a couple of things, right? And you've spoken to the systems helping to facilitate that evolution and not getting them locked into an approach. Most importantly, what role does e-learning and certification, those are pieces that haven't been touched, e-learning and certification play in staying ahead in today's fast-changing landscape?
In nearly universal principles of projects, there's a principle basically saying that you shouldn't limit yourself to one system. So for example, if you say that I'm a P3 Express person, I don't care about anything else, that is not good. You should try to, as a good project manager, you have to learn as many of those as you can. You will be inspired by many of them. Sometimes you can't even use them. For example, if you're working in construction projects, Scrum is not useful to you. I mean, some people won't agree with me on that, but I have good reasons for it. It's not useful for you, but still you can learn it and be inspired by it. So why not? We have to be open. That's important. Moving to the other parts of your question, for e-learning course, I'm really, really in favor of it. The downside with e-learning course is that you don't have direct interactions with the participants. But other than that, everything else is advantages. I used to give many classroom courses. It's not easy. You go there and you spend 7 hours, 2 or 3 days in a row. It's really intense. And sometimes you just don't feel very good. It impacts the quality of your course. You're not always energetic. You're not always focused. And the poor people who are spending their time and money coming to the course, they won't get the best thing they can. But with e-learning courses, when you record a few lessons, if you're not happy with it, you will just record it again and again and again and again until you really, really like it. That's great. So basically the person gets the best version of your course. That's one advantage. The other advantage is that in a classroom, a good trainer is always paying attention to all the signals from people, because sometimes one person doesn't understand one little thing and They don't feel comfortable asking a question, but because of the thing they didn't understand, they can't understand the rest. They pile up, and all of a sudden, they are disconnected from the course. In an e-learning course, there's the great advantage. When they don't understand it, they just pause, they go back, they listen again. They do it sometimes 2 or 3 times, and they don't understand. They just go and look it up somewhere else and read it in a different language, different type of perspective. They understand and then come back. It's really great. There's a difference in price. It can be a lot more affordable. It won't be limited to being in the same location. There are lots of advantages. I think in almost all cases, we have to move toward e-learning courses. And there's a disclaimer that I earn a living based on e-learning courses, but I'm not saying this because I earn a living from e-learning courses. I earn a living from e-learning courses because I believe that's the good thing. But anyway, that's the disclaimer for everyone. The last part was about certifications. There are good and bad things about certifications. And for me, it's a little bit hard to say what the overall balance is. Some of the disadvantages, one is that there is this tendency in many systems that have certifications to become too commercial. And there are examples that the listeners are probably thinking about, even non-for-profit organizations that become more commercial than commercial organizations because of their certificates. That's really, really bad. The other thing is that there are so many people who just learn how to pass the exam instead of learning the skills defined in that exam. Although you can say that even without the certification, they won't change. I mean, the certification is not the one that is changing them into something superficial, but that's how they were, even without it. I don't know. But there are also good things about certifications. I can think of 2. One is that I think for all of us, we are really selective when we are learning on our own. Think of yourself when you want to learn something, you go and find different things related to that, and you focus on the most interesting parts of that. When you reach some subset of that topic that is not interesting, you don't spend a lot of time in it. For example, many people who are learning project management don't spend a lot of time learning about quality management because it may not be the most interesting part. But the good thing with certifications is that then you have to, based on the commitment you have to your own goals, you see that you have to learn quality management as well. And that creates a more holistic type of knowledge for you, which is very helpful. And a related thing is that it gives you a plan on what to learn, which is good. Otherwise, you may have to spend too much time searching and deciding what you have to learn. And then there's the last thing, which might be a little bit silly, but I was personally against certifications many, many years ago, mainly because I used to say that I don't need to have a certificate to tell people that I'm competent or something. And for me at that time, certificates were too expensive, really, really expensive. I was thinking about PMP, and I used to live in Iran. Now I live in Belgium. But in Iran, because of the sanctions, you couldn't take the PMP exam. You had to travel to another country, a neighboring country or somewhere else, and take the exam there. So you also have to pay for that travel. And I was younger, my income was lower, and PMP exam is expensive. But anyway, people gradually started hearing more and more about the PMBOK guide, about the PMP exam. And we used to have many customers who believed that we should run the projects based on the PMBOK guide. And then they had people come into our projects to audit it. And I knew the PMBOK guide really, really well. But they had incorrect information or ideas about the PMBOK guide, and I couldn't convince them that they are wrong and what we are doing is okay. Finally, I gave up. I took the exam and became PMP certified. I don't know when it was, maybe 20 years ago, more than 20 years ago, if I'm not wrong. I'm not sure. I have to look it up. When I did it, everything changed. I didn't have to convince them that much. They accepted that I knew it. And it solved all those problems for me. And he said, well, it was really worth it. And it's not great, but it's always there. It's a simple way of convincing people that you have certain skills. It's easier than telling them about what you know.
Right. So to summarize what you said in very, very few words, basically for any aspiring project manager out there, certifications don't validate competency, but certifications provide information that you are aware of a body of knowledge, right? And they basically help with containing that body of knowledge to say that, okay, as opposed to looking for each aspect of the overall competency, there is one body of knowledge you can get through and showcase that you have studied for it to get to pass the certifications. And what that says, or what that says to any recruiter out there is that, okay, you are aware of this body of knowledge, of that body of knowledge, and so forth. Proving competency is a completely different thing. The certifications don't prove the competency per se, but it helps. And of course, e-learning, a lot of e-learning is required because of the advantages that Nader has mentioned. You will need to continue to learn because, of course, the world is changing so fast. So you need to continue to learn. Where certifications are required, remember what it is about. Approach them. If they are too expensive, don't get into debt. Don't get into debt, and you cannot travel cross country with some certifications like you did. Don't do that, right? But of course, you did hear him also confirm the advantage that it brought us. So that's everything in a brief. That leads me to my last question. What are the most, you've written so many books and of course put together so many courses. What are the similarities between your teaching project management and your leading teams when it comes to practical project management? And the reason I'm asking this question is, how can leaders apply the lessons to ensure there's consistent success? Meaning that you do get to see aspiring PMs and you get to probably see some experienced PMs in some cases, and you understand you understand the gaps in their knowledge, right? And you can still help them bridge those gaps. And when you do get on real projects, are you still a leader? To your point earlier, are you open to being a teacher or otherwise? What positions should leaders take?
Maybe I can say something else before that. You mentioned the books, and sometimes people think, why are there so many of them? And there's a story behind it. Many of them are not really related to project management. Obviously, how many books can you write about project management? A single person, I mean. The reason is that when I started writing books, it was not like today where you can just go to Amazon and publish it yourself. It was all through traditional publishers, and they were really careful about the financial aspects. I usually had I had the first book, it has a different story. It was about photography, and it was very successful. So they trusted me, but they couldn't trust all the topics I had in mind. So we used to have deals for me to write one or two books with the titles they like, for example, about Excel or AutoCAD or other pieces of software, and then they would accept a book with the title I wanted, for example, Microsoft Project or Primavera or something else, or the PMBOK Guide. That's why I have so many books. Then back to your question, I've learned two things that were really helpful to me in those books and the e-learning courses. in order to have something successful, there are two tricks I have. One may not be useful to leaders, but the other one is. The one that may not be useful to leaders is that when you want to write something or teach something in any format, you have a type of audience in mind, right? You are explaining things for an audience. Most people have an implied type of general audience in mind based on all the assumptions that they have about people. And as it turns out, many of those assumptions are not right. For me, what I've always done is that my audience is myself. I imagine myself being trained in that topic, and I create something that I would love to read or watch. And it seems to be successful so far. So I'm closer to the average person than the imaginary average person is. That's one trick. And the other one is that imagine most of the common courses for project management, in many of them, the way it works is that the trainer comes and says, okay, now let's talk about, for example, the business case. The business case is the definition of the business case. And then they give the composition of a typical business case. And then they go through the life cycle that a business case has in a project and so on. I don't like that. What I really like is to go and say, okay, now let's talk about the problem. Imagine this type of scenario. You go on with the project, this and that happens in the middle of the project. It doesn't make sense anymore, but we don't understand and continue wasting our money on it. That's horrible, isn't it? Then people share stories and so on. And they say, what can we do to stop that problem? We gradually build something that, okay, we need to frequently check the justification of the project. And then, okay, now how can we check the justification? These are the things we need to compare and make sure. And the last step is to say, okay, these are the things that we need, and we need to document them to get back to those things. I mean, it's a good idea to have a name for that document. People usually call that a business case. That's the way I like to teach, and I think it makes a lot more sense. And it's all about understanding the purpose of things. Again, it's one of the principles in No. Don't do anything without having a clear purpose. It's also super important in projects. A lot of times, people are asked to do things as project managers or project management team members, and they just do it without understanding why they are asked to do that. But if you ask the person why and understand what they need, maybe you can come up with a better solution. Or at least what you do will really satisfy what they needed. I think that's the most important one. And also, again, for people who are watching, the cargo cult effect, look it up. It's really interesting. It happens when you don't have clear purpose and you don't understand the dynamics behind things. You just go on for the superficial aspects.
Awesome. Awesome. Thank you so much. That really helps. Leadership is more about, of course, anything being done to a clear purpose as communicated and factored in the new model, for example. And there are some other ways you can get it factored into what you do. But as a leader, it helps to lead from that way of thinking, as opposed to dictating and teaching that people don't understand, and they can't even contribute to solutioning, right? They can't contribute to how things are done, right? If there is a better way or otherwise. Overall, I want to really thank you for the time. I want to thank you
My pleasure.
for exposing so many things and helping the audience through an understanding of the project management landscape. At this point, I would want to ask, how best can the audience reach you if they want to reach out to you? If anyone has any questions for you or want to access any service or product or service or webinar you have coming up shortly.
I don't offer services like that. And Well, right now, all my time is spent on either our company where we create e-learning courses, the commercial activities, or the non-commercial activities where I spend the rest of my time going to different countries for conferences and contributing to different project management resources. To reach me, the best thing is my website. Maybe you can write it on the screen
Yes,
somewhere.
of course.
Yeah,
Of
that's
course, I will.
nader.pm. Well, that's the single source of truth. Anything I do will be reflected there. Any article I write, any presentation I give, everything is there. But for a more interactive type of relationship, for sending messages and so on, I'm also very active on LinkedIn. And if they go to my website, there's also the link to my LinkedIn, but you can also write it here if you want.
Overall, I hope you've learned more than I've learned in some way, shape, or form. Um, for now, remember to comment, ask questions, engage, and let us know if you have any thoughts, any concerns, any confusions. Engage so that we can respond to it. And don't forget to subscribe to the Life 90 Project Management channel. For now, never forget, every man is the architect of his fortunes.
Thank you, Justice.